I had you do a figure eight drill at the end of your workout, dribbling the ball, and you were tripping over your own feet. And it's like, oh, wait, no, redo, no rep. And they're fumbling all over the place. You couldn't even do 20 complete circles in the figure eight smoothly because you're tired and you're exhausted. Let me see you clear that before we talk about going back to playing on the field with other athletes.
Hi, guys. Welcome to the Strong Female Athlete Podcast. Just want to give a quick shout out to our official sponsor, Simply Faster, a company dedicated to better tools and better technology for athlete development. If you're serious about gaining speed and power, I highly recommend you check out their amazing products and technology that's really taking athletes and coaches to the next level. So be sure to check them out, and let's get into today's guest. Mike, welcome to the Strong Female Athlete Podcast.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
I can't wait for this discussion because you're someone I really look up to in terms of ACL rehab, getting female athletes back to the field stronger than they were prior to injury, and just overall injury reduction and performance for female athletes and what they really should be doing to become resilient. So maybe just give a quick background on who you're currently working with and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so actually in October I'll be 15 years experience as a physical therapist. It's kind of time flies. It doesn't feel like that. But I work for Ivy Rehab, so it's a big company up here in the Northeast area, and we have like a sports performance specialty clinic. So we see a lot of athletes, anywhere from maybe as young as 9 all the way up to college. And then we obviously have general population, older active adults, but we do have a heavy specialty for ACL, and just kind of fell into that probably a little bit before COVID. I met a strength performance coach you had on your podcast not long ago, Joe Haas, and he was in the realm of working with athletes when they were done with physical therapy and trying to transition them back onto the field, because there was a huge gap, and there still is, as to what does that look like? How do you come out from a major surgery and finish therapy and then transition back into being an athlete? There's so many phases that entails, not to mention a healthy athlete, the phases that they go through in order to prepare to, be competitive or to be able to, do what they need to do on the field or court, whatever hobby or sport they're doing. So there was a huge gap there, because what he was doing was he was basically receiving athletes after therapy, and they just weren't ready to do the demands that he wanted them to do. And some of it really wasn't that complicated. It was just, some single leg positions or some change of direction. And these athletes couldn't even stand on one leg for 10 seconds. They didn't have a foundation of control, functional movement patterns. And, it's a cash based program because unfortunately insurance doesn't cover this stuff. They don't really care about the athlete getting stronger, faster, quicker, all the things you need for sports performance. They just want them to get healthy, get back to their ADLs, so activities of daily living, and be able to function. So when it comes to that, obviously you need like a cash-based program for someone to do this. So when it was coming time for him to tell these athletes, like, look, we need to do this, and they couldn't do certain foundational things, he's having conversations with the parents like, look, I can't take your money here. They need foundation work. And they're saying, well, we just spent 8 months in therapy. What are you talking about? And that's kind of where there's a tough conversation as to what does that look like. So Joe and I had linked up when we got into this specialty of working with these athletes, because I was a physical therapist that he felt was kind of hitting all those checkpoints for what was required in therapy. And he was that next later stage coach, performance individual that I could send athletes to, and felt comfortable that they were going to go and be on the right track. Because, look, there are a lot of trainers out there. There are a lot of individuals that, they're in the performance space and they do athletic development, and, return to play is a catchy phrase now. And, they do all this training, but they're not hitting the checkpoints that need to be done. It's kind of just shiny object stuff is what we call it. It looks good. Parents are paying $300 a month, and it's like socialization and just doing some things. So it's kind of all over. And Joe really had this organized program, and that kind of blended well after how I did stuff in therapy. And then we started kind of getting into this together, and that's really where we are today. And now it's after having all these years of working with so many athletes, we have an idea of a system and what works together. And now we're kind of fine tuning it, in terms of building out more like a little bit of like a protocol and making a rhyme and reason to all the stuff that we're doing, so it makes sense to the athlete, to the coach, to the parent, and kind of having these checkpoints that they get to that allows them to progress to the next level of each thing, so they understand where they need to be in the rehab process, and why, and how they need to what they need to do to get to the next level. So kind of organizing everything that we're doing, instead of just saying, oh, it looks good, or just do this next. There's a rhyme and a reason to it all. So that's really the space I'm in now, and it's been a lot of work. It's definitely been fun, but a lot, because you're kind of trying to spearhead change, and there's very few that are on that level wanting to do that. Unfortunately, professional physical therapy has a lot of complacency in it, a lot of just vanilla kind of borderline, just clock in, punch out. That's it. And it's not to all of PT's fault. It's just, I think, the way the healthcare system is very based on numbers and the grind, and it's hard for individuals to show up every day and try to go above and beyond, because it's draining and it requires a lot of work to do that. And then you have these productivity standards that are on top of you from large corporations and companies. So it's like, how do I meet the productivity standards, and how do I do a good job without going home and feeling burnt out and having nothing left for whether it's yourself or your family or hobbies or anything. So it's trying to find that balance. But I will say, the longer we've been doing this and the more we kind of keep pushing forward with it and it starts to make sense, it gets easier, because you've been working with it so long. It's like breaking ground at first. And then once you start getting that hole going, it just gets easier to dig. So that's kind of the trajectory that we're on right now.
I really love what you and Joe are doing, and just like the team that you guys have formed. And I think a lot of physical therapists tend to take it all on themselves, but you're humble enough to be like, look, like as soon as they can get to this certain stage, off to the strength coach they go with someone I trust who can prepare them for those sport demands. And this isn't to say that physical therapists don't know that stuff. It is few and far between, like you said, but I think it's cool that you guys have this team together where you go through the checkpoints and he does his job, you do your job. And at the end of the day, it's serving the athlete through that entire rehab process. And there's no egos in the way. And we're just trying to make sure that they're playing the sport stronger, faster, and better than they were prior to injury, which really should be the goal. Do you think that a lot of, you mentioned like just like checking a box with physical therapists, do you think a lot of rehab programs are just kind of taking people through the motions and being like, well, you're cleared by the surgeon, like you're able to do some of this in the clinic. Okay, you can go right back to the field and go full force. Do you feel people are just kind of like giving up, or what is it? Hey guys, just want to take a quick moment to shout out our sponsor, Simply Faster, and one of my favorite speed timing systems from them, the Freelap. I use it for my own sprint training as well as for my athletes, and they love it. It's super easy to set up, you can take it to the field on your own, and you can get accurate speed times to track your progress. Check the Freelap link in the caption below to start adding timing into your speed sessions. If you know me, you know I love my Freelap. If you're serious about speed, it's time to start timing.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of therapists don't really know what to do. And, I've been in that position before where you're doing an okay job, but it's not great. And there is an experience that's required when you're working with athletes. It's different. The thing I will say is that, the foundational points of human performance affect everybody, whether it's a 9-year-old or a 65-year-old. It's just the severity of the deficits. For a lot of these younger individuals, they don't have the foundation because they've never been exposed to it, but they could be trainable and they're kind of like sponges, they'll absorb. Whereas an older population, they've gone through so many decades of life where they've been doing things one way. It's hard to break those old habits, or their bodies have adapted to certain shapes and positions, and they've kind of done some irreversible damage to themselves. So, there's only so much you could salvage. Where you have a 13-year-old, the sky's the limit for teaching them how to squat properly. Where for someone who might be in their late 70s, maybe their max squat is going to be able to get up off a couch, a toilet, a chair effectively. But it still comes down to the same principle of a functional movement. And before you would even add any load or weight to that, you would make sure that that movement looks clean. If it doesn't look clean, why would you make it harder by adding more resistance? So that's kind of done backwards. That therapists, trainers, and coaches will tend to do that. They want to strengthen and strength train, but they're adding resistance to movement that's not healthy, but they don't know what healthy movement's supposed to look like. And now not everything has to be extremely like checkpoint, like this is what it looks like, but we have a general understanding now of looking at people move and analyze with all the technology as to what a healthy squat should look like, what variances of size and age and things like that, and what is important based on sport, what movements they need to do. So when you're training certain positions, there needs to be like certain guidelines to what that movement should look like. And then there's variances. Well, everyone says, oh, well, their squat's not going to look like that when they're competing in the sport. And yes, there's going to be some movement, there's going to be some variation, but when you want to train a movement, you have to reduce compensatory factors. So you're actually training the muscles you're trying to hit for that movement. Then once they understand how to do that, you could do variances. Like they need a baseline, they need like a center home to start from. And if they're always using compensatory techniques, they never really know where their baseline is. So if you train a squat and they're using lumbar extension or they're compensating with their spine or they're rotating or shifting, it means they don't have an understanding of the squat. So fix that. And then when you train a squat with weight, here's your baseline, here's your structure. Then you can start playing around with different variances. You could add thrusters, you could add dynamic movements, all those things. And when they train healthy, most of the percent of the time, and they have that movement, then they can get away with some compensation in their sport because you're going to cheat and you're going to compensate when you're competing. It's natural, it's human performance. But when you're always training compensation, there's only so much your body could take, so it'll break. And that's what happens to a lot of these kids. They're always training compensation over and over and over again. Eventually, their body breaks. But if they had a foundation to constantly train, then when they deviate away from that, they have a little bit of wiggle room. It's just a lot of people are just training the wrong way. And unfortunately, they're not teaching that in PT school. There's no like foundation of what healthy movement should look like. So therapists come in and they don't really know how to retrain that. You have to go and take continuing ed courses and you have to get out into the field and see that. And then, like, what does that look like? So sometimes it's really hard, or they put them on a program and, they just kind of have them go through the motions. I'll just add another set of 10 or another set of 15, and they call that progression. But there's no rhyme or reason to the progression. Are you adding that set because this was getting easy? Or are you adding the set because you want them to have more practice with that? You'd be surprised. I have them wearing blood flow restriction, training. We do the BFR cuffs and just doing body weight. And by like a third set, the form breaks down because of their fatigue. So I make them clear that first before we even add resistance. That's one form of challenging them. So there's a rhyme and reason for the progressions as to why you're giving them more. But, again, a lot of therapists coming out don't really know what that looks like, or you have a large majority in the profession that don't really have exposure to human performance or sports. I mean, you don't have to be an Olympic athlete to be a PT, but you should have some exposure to athletic, competition and background. I mean, I understand book smart's one thing, but you have to be able to understand what your athlete's going through, especially if you want to work with this population. Understand, periodization, muscle taxing, understanding the toll it takes on you, because that goes into the training. How does 2 weeks ago affect you, this week? And those are the things that are not being talked about and discussed. And, these are the things that go into getting athletes better. And it's just kind of throwing these programs at them of doing stuff. Like a lot of patients will come in and they know their routine. And that's a red flag. They come in, they do the same stuff, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. Our programs here are pretty progressive. They have certain pieces that are part of a warm up, but the warm up will get progressive, whether it's maybe another round of 500 meters on the rower, or, we use a neurocognitive device here called a quick board. So the playlists on that are always changing. Sometimes they have ankle mobility drills they need to do, or maybe it's a little bit more on the assault bike. Regardless, they know what their warm up is, but there could be some variances in that. But then their program, it'll fluctuate. So if we're working on squat patterns, we're looking to try to do some progression. So can we add more weight, more resistance? Can we add a variance to that? And then that looks good. Then we start adding the plyometrics. All right, maybe last time we were working on jumping on a 6-inch box with good form and technique. That looks good. Now we're going to elevate the height, or maybe do more sets and reps, and then start doing, different lateral type jumps or different progressions or broad jumps, or changing the power, the effectiveness, med balls, whatever it is, you're changing the variance, but they're learning the pattern, and then they're progressing different variances from there. So there's, okay, I'm coming in, but a month ago I did squats. I couldn't do this much volume. I couldn't do this type of variance of the jump. So they see the progressions and they keep kind of checking the boxes as they progress. So eventually they get to the point where, look, you checked all the boxes in PT. Now it's ready for you to go into a strength coach because now they could take the reins. You have a foundation of strength and resilience and plyometric. Now you can go to that program because you're past the skill of a skilled PT. And from my reins of a PT, I built that foundation for you. Now you need the performance M. And then again, insurance company is not going to pay for that. They're not going to pay for an athlete doing med ball slams and plyometrics. They just don't care about that. They're like, look, they're healthy. They could do all the things they need to do to operate in their daily life, high school, college, whatever. Like they're good. And now you need the next level coach to do that next level stuff.
Mhm. You touch on so many good points about the programming, and it's very scary that you don't learn about this in PT school and just
Yeah.
like basic principles of training and progression and not always hanging out at the same sets and reps and when to add more load to the bar. And it's just, yeah, it's really scary. And then you see some of these athletes at like 7, 8, 9 months post-op, and they don't even have that base of strength because they didn't really push it in physical therapy. They didn't progress in that load each
Right.
week. And you'll find this crazy. I had a girl 7 months post-op who not once learned how to hinge or load a deadlift in all 7 months. And I'm like, well, what have you been doing for the whole time? And we can start talking about exercise selection, but we did a lot of leg press. We did a seated calf raise, and I'm like, "Did you
Yeah.
single leg squat? Did you deadlift?" Like, and it was just like all these more like isolated movements, which can have their place at certain stages. But at 7 months, I'm like, you should be able to do a weighted squat. You should be able to do a single leg squat without wobbling like a tree. You should be able to deadlift at least your body weight by that point. So, let's
Yeah.
talk about exercise selection.
Yeah. I mean, this was stuff I didn't learn in PT school or even in the beginning of my career. I didn't learn it until one of my coworkers who came in who has 30 years experience and was a Hall of Famer Olympic rower in the 90s taught me this stuff because he created a system that we use that really got you to understand where the dysfunction is coming from. And people get injured because they don't move right. And I know that sounds weird, but we're more sedentary as a society. I mean, the elephant in the room is we have a major healthcare crisis in our country. And as much as we have kids involved in sports, the organized sports push, our kids are actually weaker than they were in the 80s. And there's data to show that. There's pediatric specialty hospitals that run data on this. They're collecting the numbers on the injuries, and the kids are weaker. They're just not well rounded. The sports specialization limits their development overall functionally. And then we're just overall as adults, too, we're more sedentary. We drive everywhere. DoorDash. I mean, you don't have to do as much active things to get simple tasks done. Everything is convenience, and it's slowly killing us, because we're becoming more convenient and your body adapts to the laziness. It likes it. It's just easier. It feels better. But in the long term, it affects the way your body functions because the human body is constructed to be able to do stuff. We're constructed primitively to hunt, to climb, to crawl, to do all these things. If you look at the human anatomy, those muscles are made for that. And human beings are the only mammal that is bipedal. So that's why we have the biggest gluteus maximus. No other mammal walks bipedal like we do. And they can't run as long as we can. They might run faster, but they can't sustain that. We're the only mammal that can do that for that reason. So the muscles for human performance, such as, our core, our glutes, our pelvis, are huge, huge indicators towards how well you're going to be able to operate as a human being. And I wrote a ton of articles on this for one of my sponsors. And it's important because parents and especially at a high school level, these younger kids don't understand why they're doing these things. So they come into therapy and they don't really understand what therapy is and why they have to do these exercises. And if you take your typical 12, 13-year-old, they don't want to come in and do this stuff. It's boring for them. They don't understand how it translates to their sport. But when you break it down to how each thing will translate to their sport and they understand the connection, it tends to be a little bit more motivating. But because we're so hyper fixated on games, tournaments, and like the race day mentality, go time all the time, we've lost track of what builds up to that. And that's the problem all around, especially in our country. You can look at pro sports, games all the time. Even at the pro level, it's just for the money and for the viewership. But what comes into human and sports performance is the foundation, and it's not healthy to be race day all the time. You can't be 110% all the time. You have to train up, and then you have your execution time, and that's performance. And we've gotten so far away from that that's damaging, and there's not enough time for the rest and the build up. This is like, driving a car and never doing the alignment or any of the checkups on it. You keep breaking it down into the ground. I use this analogy all the time, my evals, and even the kids that are really good at it, you're flooring the car with the emergency brake on. You could do it, but you're damaging your body to get from point A to point B. And some athletes are very good at hurting. So they do that and they think that they're doing a good job, but they're destroying their bodies. And this is all the way up even to the pro level. They don't understand that they're just destroying themselves to get to that level and compete. But then, 5, 10 years from now, they're going to have nothing. Like you see the ACL tears, second tears, third tears. They're not seeing the longevity. What are you going to look like when you're 35 years old, when you're 40 years old, or even 10 years from now when you're in your 20s? So how are you going to operate? How are you going to function? So these things are very damaging. So it cycles back to why we do the exercises. And we start with very, very basic stuff. We analyze how they move, and it starts with simple things with them on their back to see if they could even fire their hip flexors, to see if they could do a bridge properly. And 9 out of 10 times, none of these kids or even adults can. They use their lumbar spine to compensate. And once you cue them and you disallow them to use their lumbar spine, you can see they have no force in their hip flexors or their glutes. They can't do a side leg raise. Hamstrings are non-existent. They compensate by extending their spine, rotating their pelvis, or they're trying to compensate someplace else. So those foundational pieces are going to translate to the bigger movements like a lunge, a squat, single leg squat. So they have to do these foundational things. We call it like drill work. And then that translates into the other things like planks and all that groundwork. And then that goes into, once they understand and control their spine and their pelvis, then they could do better with the bigger things. And when you look at how they try to squat or do a lunge, it's all over the place. There's no control. So we use these pieces to teach them the control. And that goes into the exercise selection. It's the groundwork, it's the functional movement. And then once they gain control of that, it allows them to graduate to the next level. So it's like, look, you have to pass fourth grade to get to fifth grade. The more you practice these basics, the more you're going to be able to do the higher level stuff. And then you start getting to your sport specific. Because, like you said, when you get athletes that get cleared at an early stage, I know right now there are very few athletes at that 6 or 7 month mark that are ready to go back to doing that because they don't have the resilience and the foundation. Because as you build them up with the strength training creates that resilience of the muscles under tension. And that's what the athlete and the parent have a hard time understanding is that resiliency to the performance is when you're playing those tournaments and you're running up and down the field and you're stopping and you're going, your muscles have to perform. And the way they get better at doing that is training these movements. You train on the resistance. That's resistance training. That's the foundation. That's the foundation to the house. If you don't have a foundation, you can have a beautiful house, but it's going to fall down. So that allows those muscles to get used to the time under tension, the loading. That translates into the accelerating, the decelerating, the kicking the ball, the stopping, and the going. And because these athletes don't do that foundation when they're playing in the sport, the muscles basically just gas out on them. So then they're not working, they fatigue out. Then guess what's next for the line defense? It's ligaments. So the muscles don't respond at the right amount of time because they're tired. And the ligaments take the blow. They take forces that they're not supposed to be doing. And that's the simple concept behind why ACL tears and things are happening. And then there's all these other factors we get into, but that goes into the exercise selection as to why are we doing these exercises, the shapes and positions. Like leg press is fine if you want to add that in, but you're also not training your control when you're an athlete. I've had a ton of older adults who train with personal trainers and they leg press like 400 pounds, but they still can't get off the toilet without back pain. That makes no sense. Then you try to watch them do a bodyweight squat, no control of their spine, and then you have them just do hands behind their head and just do body weight. They're gassed out with 2 sets of 10. Doesn't make any sense. So I tell them, like, explain that to me. You're paying all this money for a trainer. You're doing all these exercises, but you're still having difficulty in your daily life. So I say that to an athlete. You're doing all this training with a trainer, or you did all this in PT, but yet you still can't do these things. Yeah. So those are the things you look at. Like they want to go back and they want to go back to the field and play. And I say, well, let's take this for a minute. Like, when was the last time you're on there? Because they say it from a position of comfort. Like the heart rate's low. They're having a comfortable conversation like you and I are having. So mentally, they feel at this moment that they could go back and play, but they haven't been exposed to it. So if you put them out on the field and they're playing in the humidity, they're playing in the heat, and they're having to go, and it's like, man, 15 minutes went by, and they start to lose their breath, they're getting tired, and it's like, well, you have 45 more minutes to go. Like, I don't think I can make it. They haven't been exposed to that. So why would you wait to throw them into a practice or a game and wait for them to find out the hard way? If you want to
Mhm.
do that with your therapist, with the transition over into the strength coach who ramps up that time and in a closed environment to see how well they do. Like I had
Mhm.
you do a figure eight drill at the end of your workout, dribbling the ball, and you were tripping over your own feet. And it's like, oh, wait, no, redo, no rep. And they're fumbling all over the place. You couldn't even do 20 complete circles in the figure eight smoothly because you're tired and you're exhausted. Like, let me see you clear that before we talk about going back to playing on the field with other athletes. Like, you have
Right.
to own these basic drills first. And that's what we're
Right.
trying to get the parent and the athlete to understand. Like, own these hip flexor pulls and these leg raises first before you want to go back to doing, weighted step ups and side planks and all this other stuff. Because if you don't have that foundation, you're just going to go back to compensation doing those drills and you're going to keep reinforcing the bad mechanics. So we're trying to comb all those bad mechanics out every level you get to, because at every level you get to, it gets harder. So you're going to go back to your old compensation techniques. Oh, you squat well here. We added 10 more pounds. Now you're going back to using your back. No, you got to own this weight, clean it up. Now you want to go back to jumping. Athletes go back to the same thing. They're getting tired, so they start caving in, using their spine. You got to clean it up. We either got to lower down the reps or add more rest break, or maybe we got to just work at this height of the box first. Own that first before we progress you. So it's the same thing getting back onto the field.
Mhm. Oh man, so many good gems there, Mike. I
Yeah.
think just that buildup of game volume and the demands is what is missed a lot, and that's where we get into the incomplete rehab. And I've seen a lot of girls cleared, and like you said, they can't own these basic drills. They can't do a linear tempo run for 8 sets with a 45-second recovery without being totally gassed. And it's like, okay, so you're telling me you want to go into an 80-minute high school game again, full speed. Okay, you can't even do this 5-minute conditioning run. Like, it's just
Yeah.
stuff like that. Or maybe they're having like clicking or swelling and pain for gym-based exercises. It's like, but you want to go into a chaotic high-speed setting when you're still getting swelling and clicking in a controlled, slow gym setting. And I've seen PTs clear girls like this. And it blows my mind, the negligence.
A lot of it is because they don't know where to go, and then a lot of it is also pressure from the athlete and the parent. And when you
Yep.
don't have a foundation and a system
Mhm.
that you understand like we do, like we know what we're looking for, and at this point we have athletes that are able to demonstrate the ability to get through these phases, especially with the testing that we use. We give them example reports like this is doable. So when the parent and the athlete pushes, we say, no, you're not ready for X, Y, and Z, and this is why. But when you don't have an organized system, it's very easy to cave in and be like, yeah, I guess. Like there's been times where I've had parents like their kid hasn't come into therapy for like 2 weeks or something, and they're just in and out, and
There's
they want me
people
to like,
missing therapy?
yeah, they just don't show up, or they're kind of getting back into sports and stuff, and then they send me an email like, hey, can you clear so and so for this? I'm like, absolutely not. I have no
Oh
idea
my
where he's
god.
been or what he looks like. And that's a liability. I'm not clearing him. Like last
Yeah.
I saw him, he was having difficulty. I just had a 13-year-old come in, and he had to have it's osteochondritis dissecans, where they basically have degeneration of cartilage in the knee. So they have to usually do like bone plug or bone transplant, a cartilage transplantation at 13.
Oh my
Growth plates are
god.
still open, not even fully grown, hasn't even probably hit puberty yet. Um, and this happened 6 months ago. So I don't know what took forever for him to get into rehab, but he's starting with me at 6 months post op, and we have to rebuild him up. And the parents just decided to throw him into a tournament. I never cleared him for that. He started getting knee pain and issues again. And they don't realize
Not surprised.
that the damage that they're going to be doing to their 13-year-old son, like he's getting pain again. Like they don't understand the severity of the
Mhm.
surgery that he just had. They're not thinking about him years from now. What is that going to do? And they're just throwing him into these tournaments. And I'm like, I never cleared him for that. Like.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I don't think people are thinking about the long-term repercussions. And I actually had a college teammate, she tore her ACL twice in high school and she had a failed first rehab. The PT cleared her around like the 9, I think even 10-month mark, and she even like said to the PT, I don't feel ready. And he's like, no, no, you're good. Like you've passed my test, whatever they were at the time.
Yeah,
This was years ago. And she retore it in her first scrimmage back. And it was non-contact, no one around her. And it was just like during like a jog misstep. Like that shouldn't be happening. And because of those two ACLs as a teenager, she now like can't go skiing in her 30s. Like she's afraid to ski and like she doesn't want to like ruin her knee because it's never going to be the same.
yeah,
And it's like, why not wait a month to maybe even 3 months? Go past the 12-month mark for all I care. I'm sure you've seen patients like that. Go past the 12-month mark, ride this out for a little bit longer because I can promise you, you don't want to go through month one again
yeah,
and then
yeah,
the rest of the year again.
yeah,
And I think Joe said on the last podcast, he was like, I always tell athletes, remember what week one felt like.
yep.
And
Th-
it's such a major surgery. It's like, why not ride this out for a little bit longer and feel like an 11 out of 10 confident in
yes.
your body and also mentally?
Yeah.
Just wait.
Yeah. I mean, they're doing stats on it. I mean, the average individual burns out from sports by the age of 16, especially when you have these multiple injuries. And I've even dealt with that before. I've had an athlete that had the first ACL tear and then just really bad rehab or went back and then just retore and it just burns them out. They don't want to do it anymore. They just give up. They don't want to do the work. And I think that's the hard part. People don't understand is the magnitude of this injury, that this is not a normal thing to be happening. Your ACL should not be tearing like this. There's always trauma, but not at this rate, 300 plus thousand a year. And the numbers keep increasing, even though we are diving more into it. Um, yeah, I think that that's the hard part. It's hard for them to really understand the severity of it. And we talked about how surgeons are trying to do their best techniques to make these things stronger, but no ACL repair is full tear proof. And we've had surgeons on our podcast saying that, and they're trying these techniques to make them more durable, but there's only so much you could do. And I think the thing is that I want parents, and these athletes understand from my perspective that there is no incentive as a PT for me to keep your daughter or son off the field. And I think, like I'll repeat that. Like there's no incentive for me to keep them off the field. I don't get paid more. It doesn't affect me personally, financially. Like my life goes on, whatever your
Mhm.
son or daughter does. I could go and work out and do what I want to do. I don't have knee pain. I don't have back pain. I don't have these major injuries. Do what I want. You know, like I'm doing this because I know it's what needs to be done, and I would not want this to happen to my kids someday. Like, so if it was my son or daughter, I'd be telling them the same thing. And you get into this profession because you want to help people, not because you want to see them suffer and go through it again. So that's like the biggest thing, that I'm not going to stand in a waiting room and argue with a parent. It's basically because I'm trying to get you to do the right thing. I need you to understand, like, there's a reason for this. Like there's no, I'm not trying to keep you here, because we
Yeah.
have had parents to say that we're fear mongering, and I'm like, fear mongering for what? Like, we're trying to get you back to this, especially when you have an individual who's not very committed to therapy, or like, they're doing certain movements and they could clearly see they can't do it. I'm like, you can't even do this, so how can you do that? Like, it's an easy litmus test. Or even for like, Joe's end, that's cash based. He's like, I'm not trying to take more money from you, but I'm showing you where your son or daughter has difficulty doing things. So if they can't do that, how are they going to go do this? It doesn't make any sense. So
Yeah.
those are the things that we're looking at. And speaking of the going back to field, that is the next piece of like our system we're kind of working on, is this, not really like an algorithm, but like a guideline to how to get them back, because we have all the other pieces that we're doing in terms of testing and milestones and things that they're going to pass to do it. But now we're looking at, okay, when it comes time to them getting on the field, what does that look like? So we're not doing it based on weeks or time, we're doing it on phases, because you might have someone who's at 10 months and they're way ahead of someone who's at 14 months, or vice versa, because we've had that. Depends on how much work the athlete puts in, how committed, So we have these phases, and it'll basically break that down as to how you pepper yourself back into practices, into scrimmages, into certain drills, ramping it up, and then it'll be like almost like a 4 week mesocycle. You start here, so then the coach and the athlete can look at it and say, "Here's where I am. Here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to see how I feel, how it responds, how I'm looking in, working with my coach and trainer with certain things, and then progress from there." And that way, it allows them to chomp at the bit and get involved, and they're not going to just because the coaches will just open the floodgates. You're cleared, we're just going to throw you back. And
Right.
that's why I think we need to get rid of the term cleared and this 9 month fixation, because this is outdated stuff. And for the high school athletes to kind of understand it, everyone loves their iPhones and their technology. This is like you're using a flip phone. Like, it's not cool anymore. So going back in 9 months, it's not cool. Like, it doesn't work. It's outdated. So you have to get it out of your head. It's an old school thing that we fixated on because we thought at that point people were ready, but they're not ready. It's showing they're not. It's going to be that 12 to 15 month mark, and then again, it's not so much cleared. It's what can you do, work on that, and then what do you still need to work on. So that way, you're getting involved with your coach and your team. You're getting back to your sport, but you're working on the drills. And even if you didn't tear your ACL, if you wanted to work your way up and try to make varsity, these are things you have to get better at. If you can't kick a corner kick or a penalty kick and you're all over the place, why are you going to try doing that, from when you're fatigued or trying to do that in a tournament? Like, you need to practice basic rest doing that. Or like a basketball player, if you can't hit a free throw, why are we trying to hit threes? So you need to practice these skills and own that before you could get there. If you can't maintain an endurance of running up and down a field, like, you would need to do that to make like a varsity team. You have these clearances to be able to keep up with the next level girls. If you can't do that, well, you're going to work towards doing this. It's the same thing as coming back from an ACL or a major injury. You need to work your way up to that to get cleared for that. So it's no different. They don't see that because they've been in the rehab process for so long and they're building up that they it's hard for them to see because they just want to get back, just want to get back. But I think it helps if they understand, like, here's the things I could get back to. Let me own these to pass, and then here's the things I need to work at. I think that is what we're starting to do with a lot of our athletes. And I think it's helpful because it allows them to wean back into it safely. And I think it'll make sense for some of these coaches too to understand, all right, how do I get this individual back? Because they don't have the bandwidth to really hyperfixate on that injured athlete. They just don't. They're looking at their star players, they're thinking about their games, they want their wins, and they don't have time to think about, all right, how do I pepper so and so back in? I need something from their training staff to say, all right, here's what I need to do. Okay, great. We're running this practice. Here's your participation today. And then when you're done with that, you're done for the day. And that's how we're gonna build you up.
Yeah. But that's another big one I see is physical therapists not providing that protocol for coming back into practice. There's no communication with the team coach, and the girl just jumps into every single drill, every single contact, small sided game. Then the first 4 game tournament weekend, she's playing all 4 games.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I've seen that with some girls where they'll do that and they'll have pain immediately again or some swelling, and then it's like, oh shoot, now we're going to take 10 steps back again, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
didn't listen to me. And
Yeah.
have you seen that with female athletes specifically who rushed back and didn't listen to your protocol to return safely back to practice and games? Have you seen them kind of come back and be like, we retour?
Yeah. So interesting enough, we are doing a parents series on our podcast where parents are coming in and talking about the experience of what it was like with their daughter or son who tore, so they can hear it from a parent perspective, of what it's like going through that. And what I kind of say to the athlete too is I have had that. I've had just most recently an example. Had an individual go back to basketball, got cleared, just went back and just did basically everything under the sun. It's like, just going like beast mode of just doing everything. You get so excited. It's like someone who hasn't seen food, after fasting, and just went back and just ate everything right away. You're gonna blow your stomach up. That's what he did. He came back and he blew his knee up.
Oh
And I
man.
said, see, because no one guided him on the right drills to do. And then
Mhm.
it frustrated. And that's the thing that I tell athletes. It's like, do you really want to do that? Do you want to make all this progress and then re-injure something and then have to come back into therapy and spend another 6 to 8 weeks in PT again because you have a
Right.
new injury? a
Mhm.
hamstring strain, an Achilles strain, an ankle sprain, back pain, because there's only so much your strength coach or performance coach could do. Eventually, it's like, all right, they're injured again. I need the PT to work with them. Now you're going back and you're setting yourself back. So yes, we have seen that. We have seen athletes go back prematurely. There are some that you kind of get a vibe from in the beginning if they're going to be focused or not. I will say the ones where the parents are not very involved, I'm not saying helicopter parents, but that support network is extremely important. When the parents just kind of drop them off and whatever, and they never check in, the athlete doesn't do well, especially the younger they are. They're on their own. And they just figure it out and they just do whatever. And it's like the parent does not, they don't want to be involved. Maybe they're just busy with other siblings, and dealing with other stuff. And there's no one, they need that support network of the surgeon, the strength coach, the PT, the parent, and everyone else supporting them saying, you need to do this. Because otherwise things do go awry and they just go back. And yeah, unfortunately they do re-tear, they get re-injured. So we do see that, and like you said, it's the point of, do you want to go back and you know how you felt that first day being in the brace? Do you want to go back through that again? Like
Mhm.
it's not worth it. And it's not, again, to fearmonger, but when you look at the mechanisms of injury, it is as easy as planting and stepping the wrong direction. That's how these ACL tears are happening. I mean, I saw a viral video of, it was like a 12-year-old just dribbling a ball in her backyard, and she just did a step over move and went to plant, and her knee buckled. You know, the other situation that I used as a great example is they were pushing, NFL players back a little too soon. That was like
Mhm.
2 years ago that they were doing that a lot. And one was, the quarterback for the Giants, Dan Jones. They sent him a little too soon back after the concussion, and all he did was stepping back into the pocket, just stepping back,
Wow.
planted his leg, and then he walked off, literally walked off like there was no problem, walked off into the locker, tore his ACL
Mhm.
because that stamp, that step in that press, that after you have a concussion, you have anywhere from like 1.9 to almost 2.3 chances of a lower extremity injury again, because that brain to muscle connection is off. So there's
Wow.
also some of that history of concussion, or those, but when those neuromuscular patterns are not fully restored, those sensory fibers in that graft don't adhere into the bone until fully about a year. So that's why the knee always still feels a little weird for a while. You have to take that into consideration. So a lot of those things of like just that step in planting, that could be just all it takes for that to happen.
Mhm.
So it's, to me, it's not worth the gamble.
I think there's just such this love affair now with we're going back after 9 months post-op. Like they're just so set on that 9-month mark. Some people sooner. I've seen on Twitter a girl released at 6 months post-op, and she posted a picture with her physical therapist, like
Yeah,
all excited. And I'm like, no one should be getting a gold star for this. Like, this
yeah,
is negligence, especially
yeah,
6 months. But
yeah,
I do want to talk about timelines because I know, like, we don't want to be so set in stone with them because there's some people who will progress a little bit sooner. But for athletes who are committed to their rehab, returning to play, have you found just like a general time frame where you feel comfortable with them returning to play? And I'm talking full force, I'm talking full minutes, high speeds, high contact, back to the player that they were. What is that average timeline? Is it the 12-month mark or is it even beyond that?
yeah. It's probably that like full on 14, 15-month mark.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we have found that there are general timelines, and we try to avoid the weeks where, when we created our kind of protocol, we based it on that timeline just to give people like an organization to it. But it's always depend on what the athlete is able to show us and how they feel. And some athletes, like I have ACLs in here at 6 weeks post-op that are crushing already, deadlift, squats, looking good. Where we have some athletes that are almost like still 6 months and they still can't get their pelvis under control for a single leg RDL squat. It's just,
Wow.
it's the commitment. It's, even if they're doing stuff on their own, are they doing the stuff that needs to be done? And that's where the presence of coaches like yourself and trainers, those programs are important. And that's what parents should think about. What am I paying for? Is because I have someone who's guiding my kid to doing the right stuff, because I know what you're doing when you go into the gym. You're doing the fun stuff. You're not doing the things that hurt and the things you need the most work with because it's hard and you want to skip it and you want to do what feels good. But we have to hit those low points. So that's kind of what we're looking at in when we've done enough athletes going through, really committed, doing it. And that's why we're constantly revamping our protocol. Is there a more effective way to get a better response? What's the best algorithm for getting this movement to fix faster? And we're always constantly revamping that. But generally, we see that we could get most of our athletes out of PT by 6 months, 5, 6 months, depending. And then it's time for them to transition into the next phase. And then from there, it's that progression of 6 to 9 months, 9 to 12, then 12 to 15. But as they're going back to playing, they're still kind of coming in and they're working with someone like Joe or,
Mhm.
our coach here, Ryan, who's an intern under Joe, and working on certain things and keeping tabs on that stuff. But the full force is something that we're starting to really look at too, because we're noticing even though they're doing the training, they're going through the drills, but we're really starting to try to push them like really hard with these drills, like putting them through like fitness gauntlets,
Yeah.
like where we break them down and then make them do that drills really hard because we're noticing that there is a disconnect with, yeah, they're doing the training, they're doing the drills, but they're not doing it at like a elevated heart rate, sweaty, exhausted. And then when they go to game time and they're trying to fight for a ball and they're going to a sideline, they're going beast mode, adrenaline goes, and that's where they're getting re-injured because they're not training in that level. It's like basically doing like a high intensity workout. Like think about like the intensity that like a CrossFit style workout or something would put on you, like an AMRAP, as many rounds as possible. So
Mhm.
we're starting to do that with the influence from like because for years I competed in Spartan race and now I do like Deca Fit and High Rocks, and that taught me a lot about human performance and periodization. And for people that aren't familiar with that, it's basically just like a fitness that involves running and movements. And that was the whole objective behind the activity was how well can you run when you're really tired and how well can you execute these movements when you're tired. And from my personal experience of going through that, of understanding, okay, I'm doing this training, but then actually hiring a coach and going through the training that'll simulate what race day is supposed to feel like. That's what it was like carrying something heavy up the side of a ski slope. Have you been here before? Have your muscles been exposed to that? Have you trained to that stimulus? Have you been able to do these rings of this obstacle when you're exhausted and your arms are tired and you're sweating and it's humid out? Have you trained in that stimulus? So now we're starting to do that where we'll, like I said, we'll put them through this fitness gauntlet, get their heart rate up, and then ask them to execute these drills. How do you feel? Are they completely crashing and burning, or do they feel like they're ready? Because that's what's going to be like in the tournament. That's what's going to be like in the game day. So those are things that we're starting to do because we're noticing there's a big gap for that. Really training like that beast mode level, but it's not all the time. We're not doing it all the time because with the practices and the games, again, they're getting that heavy stimulus all the time. It's like 3 games a week, and there's more practices. They never get that rest and recovery time. So we have to find the window in their season when we could do that to prep for them, because then when they're going full game mode, we have to find out, all right, now we got to do it the other way. We got to dial them back because they're already going high intensity. Now we got, all right, now we got to pepper in a little bit of strength work, maybe 30 minutes of just these key movements, kick that stuff in, or maybe dialing in some rest recovery. You have a tournament coming up. This is not the week to be staying up late on Snapchat and TikTok. Like now, you maybe need to get to sleep a little bit earlier, hydrate a little bit better, things like that. Getting them to understand like what are those things that are going into your ability to go and compete at high level full on. So it's not even so much the timeline, it's more about like, are you ready and what things are you doing to prepare for that? Like do you have these things dialed in that you're ready to go full on mode? Are you athletically ready mentally and physically? Because if you're not doing those things to prep, you're not ready for full athletic mode. If you're staying up late and not eating well and you're not dialing it in, then that tells me you're not really game ready. I want to see the athlete is game ready, like you're dialed in. So those are the other factors that kind of go into that.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like your take on just putting that environment in the PT clinic or the strength and conditioning gym to almost simulate that game speed, the cardiovascular effect. And I always say that like PT and the return to play, it should be challenging. Like it should really be pushing you towards like those final few months to get ready, like pushing it with the conditioning and even with some of the contact drills. I mean, I don't see enough volume of contact happening in the final few months. It's just kind of like, oh, like I'm going to push you with the stability ball lightly. And it's like, no, like
Yeah,
we need to go a little bit harder than that, because when they have like a girl that's 5'11" coming at them full speed, then what are you going to do? You haven't
yeah,
had that in a year's time or maybe longer. So
yep,
yeah, just trying to mimic that the best we can. And I think that's one thing like parents don't understand. They're like, well, I passed all the strength tests that my physical therapist gave me. And I'm like, okay, that's the base. Like you
yeah,
said, that's
yeah,
just the foundation.
yeah,
But then now we got to get ready for what's actually happening in the game. And that's the
yeah.
contact piece and being comfortable with contact.
It's hard to add a standardized test to those things because how do you standardize that type of stuff? So that's always going to be the hard piece in that return to
Yeah.
sport. We do look at these testings that we do to see if they do have that foundation and that baseline to do these things. But part of that training should be look, you passed this and like your foundation is ready to go back to play. But I ask that to the parent all the time. You say your son or daughter is ready to play, but when was the last time they got hit, like really rocked? Like going for a ball, a 50-50, getting hit off the ball and then being bounced and landing on that leg again and then taking another hit from a contact as someone's trying to come in. Have they been rocked around like that yet at 9 months post-op? No. You willing to throw your daughter in and do that? And then if they go and do that, do they flinch? Do they hesitate?
Yeah.
Another girl who sees that is going to take advantage. And I know how they get on that field. They get competitive, they get dirty. And especially these parents that want to bring their daughters or son to a showcase, you're going to take your son or daughter to a showcase where they're fighting for a spot. Another athlete, especially with a parent that is not a good sportsman, is going to see that. They're going to pull their son or daughter to the side and say, see, she's flinching, take her out. And they're going to go and do that. Now your son or daughter gets injured again at a showcase in front of the coaches, wasn't ready. You couldn't even show 110%. Like, why do you want to see your child go through that again? That defeats their confidence. It totally blows them up. It's embarrassing. Why would you want to do that to your child? It doesn't make any sense to me. For what? To appease these coaches? I mean, that's the other elephant in the room. This is all
Or to
about
get
money.
exposure and
Yeah,
or not
yeah,
miss
these
high school season. It's like, well, it's
yeah,
not
no
worth
one
it.
cares. It's next man up mentality. Your son or daughter gets injured, the next one's coming up on the bench. It's just how it is. It's like that at the pro level. An athlete gets injured, they find a replacement. It's an insurance policy. NFL does it, NBA does it, Major League Soccer, pro soccer, all this stuff, they do it. They have to have insurance so they compete. They're not going to allow athletes to get injured. They have no one to play. They're always going to find that replacement. You have to advocate for yourself. I mean, this is why players have agents. Agents have to advocate for themselves. And even when pro athletes go and they see top surgeons and the surgeon says, this is the surgery, this is the expectation. If they don't like it and the agent doesn't like it, they could go see somebody else. And the
Yep.
surgeon, they find some surgeons that, yeah, we'll get you back like 2 weeks sooner or something. The agent's like, let's do that. Might not be in the best interest. There's so many athletes that blow their career, mismanaged. There's so many issues of that. And then now they're not even doing sports anymore. They're commentating or they're doing like influencing or something on social media. Their pro career is done because they were mismanaged. No one advocated for them. Instead of having somebody in their corner saying, no, this is how you're going to do. You're going to take your time. This is what needs to be done the right way. And then like, what's it for? You know, it's a shame. It's a huge culture battle that we're fighting. But the more we try to educate people and the more they can advocate for themselves, the stronger they're going to be because the parents are the shareholders in this. The parents pay the money to the clubs. So without the product, and the money, you don't have anything there. So these coaches, if the parents come forward and say, we want change, they're going to have to be forced to make a change, you
Yeah.
know?
I think people just need to learn how to delay gratification.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Yeah.
live in that instant society, we want that instant gratification.
Yeah. And it's gosh, an ACL reconstruction is such a major surgery and it's such a long road. And it's like you put in all of that work for, let's say, like 9 months of your rehab. And then you're like, all right, I'm going to take this risk, even though I don't feel ready. I don't feel fully confident. Or, my daughter hasn't really done contact exposures or enough change of direction exposures. Her conditioning's not quite there, but she's cleared. Let's go. And it's like you just put in all this work to take that gamble and she's not fully ready. It's just like, man, like this 9 months is like almost, I don't want to say useless, but it can be when you take that gamble.
Yeah. And a lot of these coaches are starting to understand it more because we're living in an epidemic. So
Mhm.
this pressure from the coaches, and we're starting to hear this more from the parents as we're bringing them onto our podcast, that a coach who's really supporting you is the one you want to be around. The ones that are pushing you or don't even check in or care, you need to find a different coach. because they are out there, and it doesn't matter the team, the prestige, you got to find one that's going to advocate for you. And a lot of these college coaches for the recruiting, from what the parents are saying, is they say when they go on these talks, say, yeah, we have someone for that, we'll work with you, we understand, we're dealing with this all the time, we have 2 ACL tears right now. Like, the pressure of not getting seen and not getting chosen because of an ACL tear, that's not the way it is. That's old thought process. So rushing back is for really no reason. And then if you really want to showcase something, get video and footage and showcase your rehab, showcase the drills that you're doing, showcase the commitment, showcase that you could follow directions, you're committed, you have discipline, and you're here. I would think a coach for a D1 program wants to see that, as opposed to the athlete that's making excuses, that's not doing their stuff, that has this natural talent when the parent says they're high level, but I don't see them doing the stuff I'm telling them to do. They don't show up on time. They have a poor attitude in the clinic. Is that really what you want to see as a D1 coach? Or do you want to see the athlete that shows up and is on time and does what they need to do and is committed and is putting that drive in and is listening? Get footage of that. Get footage of your trainer cueing you, of showing you doing the stuff, watching the hard work you're doing, seeing the progressions. Like, we love putting tons of stuff on our Instagram and getting footage. Like, that is a great showcase for a coach. Like, look, I'm not here yet, but look at what I'm doing. That to me, like, that goes a long ways, and just trying to rush back and being like, oh, I'm not being seen doing these drills I'm not ready for, and then forcing myself to do something. you know
Mm. Well, Mike, this has been an amazing conversation, and this really needs to be heard by so many parents and players going through the ACL rehab process right now. So, where can everyone find you?
So we'll be posting a lot of this stuff after you post it. Put it on LinkedIn, so I'm on there. I will post it on my page and then in the sports performance group, and then I'll post it on my Facebook page. I'm on there. We'll put it in the Parents of ACL group, the ACL Return to Play Academy. So I have a bunch of pages on there, and then we'll put it on our Instagram page. Ours is column core underscore human performance, and that's our clinic page where we'll post all this. And a lot of the athletes that obviously come here follow us, and the parents, so I won't have access to listen to this stuff.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. And I'll put all those links in the caption below so you can follow Mike's content and just keep up with all the amazing work he's doing in ACL rehab and return to play. So, Mike, thank you so much. And I'll see
Yeah, this was
everyone next
awesome.
time.
Thanks for having me.